What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Believe Fantasy Football Show with your pal Fabs here. And I've got a special guest, former NFL running back and a guy that I had on a couple of fantasy teams back in the day, Robert Turbin. What's going on, Turbo?
What it do? How you doing, man? Things are great.
I'm doing well. I hear you with my guy Steve Cohen on Sunday mornings over at SiriusXM on the NFL channel.
Man,
You having fun with Stevie C?
I was gonna say it's been a lot of fun working with Steve on Sunday mornings, man. We bring the energy, we bring the juice, obviously some good analysis on the upcoming ball games, and it's been dope this year. It's been good.
Yeah, Steve and I go way back, man. He's a good guy, a real good friend. And you also play fantasy football. You and I are in a couple of leagues together, so you are in the know when it comes to fantasy, and we're going to talk a lot about that as we finish up Week 8 with the review, of the Vikings Niners game, which went in a completely different direction than I think any of us predicted. Not only did the 49ers lose the game on the field, but Kirk Cousins played great. Kirk Cousins threw for almost 400 yards against the Niners and scored 21 fantasy points, which was just absolutely insane. No one saw that coming. Jordan Addison had a big game. TJ Hawkinson had a big game. Alexander Madison, not so much. Give me your thoughts on this Vikings offense, because it was the first game without Justin Jefferson where they looked good. They've got Green Bay on the road next week.
Well, they've always had a good scheme, and although Alexander Madison didn't have a good game on the ground, they were still able to get enough from him and Cam Akers, who sparked, by the way, with his opportunities last night as well, to be able to utilize some of that play action stuff that they like to do within their offense. So their scheme, works really well. They played like a team with nothing to lose last night. And, the 49ers just kind of, you could tell that they were playing with a little bit of extra shouldering. Like, man, we really have to get this done or it's not going to look well. And I think it impacted their team overall. And you saw that when it came to those clutch moments, those opportunities during the fourth quarter, they weren't able to execute, and the Vikings got the dub.
Yeah, it was a weird week overall. This is one of those weeks where you kind of like, you crunch it up into a little ball and you throw it in the trash can because nothing seemed to go right. I mean, Kirk Cousins on Monday nights was 2-9 against the spread, dating back to 2015, and he goes out there and not only beats the spread but wins the game outright for the Niners. Brock Purdy was a disappointment. I thought he'd have a bigger game. He turned the ball over a few times, had only 13 points. CMC was CMC. Forget about any kind of injury. He had another big game, a couple of touchdowns. The easiest money in gambling is anytime touchdown Christian McCaffrey on a weekly basis. He does it every single week. I was bummed that Brandon Ayuk didn't have a bigger game. He had a good first half, and he disappeared in the second half, finishing with only 10.7 points. George Kittle had 13 for the Niners. They've got the Bengals coming up next in a matchup of, I guess, I don't think that this is a Super Bowl preview, but I mean, the Bengals are a team that a lot of people had as a potential AFC contender. Maybe that will change, but certainly an interesting game back at home for the Niners. Do you expect them to bounce back now that they've got a 2-game losing streak going against a team that's coming off a bye?
Well, it's not going to be easy, because you're going up against Jamar Chase and the rest of those boys at the receiving corps for the Bengals, and they've been catching their groove. And for whatever reason, the 49ers in the secondary these last couple of weeks, haven't been great. They've been struggling. Now, they've had some unfortunate calls go against them. And I think in the secondary where I think the referees kind of could have kept those flags in their pocket. Nonetheless, they've been a little bit exposed these last couple of games, especially last night when you talk about these young receivers, KJ Osborne and Jordan Addison, how they were able to find, some open windows. And so it's going to be a tough challenge, but I think with the 49ers being at home and they'll have the 49er faithful behind them as I get a ESPN alert about
All good.
some of the fantasy stuff going on in our league.
I got the same thing. Yeah.
I think they'll bounce back. They'll bounce back at home, and you'll see a sharper game from Brock Purdy and those guys. But when you don't have Debo Samuel, and teams are able to then kind of key on, Brandon Ayuk, and eliminate him from a schematical standpoint, it makes it very difficult for the 49ers offense, to be successful. It's not the type of scheme that is built to, which is weird to say, but they're not really built to come from behind.
The,
And yeah, I think that's why you Kyle Shanahan. I mean, you think about his record, 0-36. I think it is when down 8 heading into the fourth quarter. That's
wow.
crazy.
Yeah,
So
the
yeah,
Niners. It's funny. The NFL. I say this all the time. Is only predictable in its unpredictability. And I think we have probably called about 5 or 6 teams the best team in the NFL this season, and then those teams go on to lose. Uh, we are never going to know who the best teams are until we get into the postseason and see who's hot. Even the Chiefs. Like the Chiefs are playing really well. They haven't beaten anybody. They haven't played a good team besides Detroit, and they lost to Detroit. That was without Travis Kelce before the whole Taylor Swift thing. So, I just don't know if there is a best team in the NFL that is going to last more than a week or two because it's just so unpredictable. It was the Cowboys, and then it was the Niners, and then the Bills killed the Dolphins. And listen, folks, we're not going
Jets
to
beat
know.
the Eagles.
It's just one of those weird things, that we're never going to be able to predict it until we get into the postseason and see who's hot and who's not. So let's go through some of the big injuries that have happened across the National Football League. Obviously, the biggest story of the weekend was Bijan Robinson, who was
Mm.
started across the board, didn't feel well. It was never reported. Apparently, the NFL is going to look into that. And Bijan did nothing because he barely played against Tampa Bay. What are your thoughts on Bijan? Like, should the Falcons kind of given us a little bit of an indication that maybe he wasn't going to play? Why would he even be active in that game? Like as a former running back, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, they certainly should have said something about his discomfort or whatever was going on with him for sure. Because there's a lot at stake. For these
Yeah,
games. You got people betting, and there's all sorts of things that are going on, and to not communicate is certainly something that puts folks at a disadvantage. Now, for Bijan, if he's not feeling well and he still wants to play, if you guys are all coming together, head coach, training staff, Bijan, and you're like, I want to gut through this, for the team, then that's another thing. That's what we do as athletes. We play through stuff. I mean,
mm-hmm.
that kind of happens from day one. And you got your famous flu game from Michael Jordan. There's all kind of games where guys are playing and they're not feeling quite right. But to not report it so folks can be prepared, I think wasn't the right way to go about it. And so, but hopefully Bijan can find a way to find his stride because he's really plateaued, this season since like week 1.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
The
you can
numbers
see.
haven't been there. He's got the Titans this week. I mean, remember, he was a first round pick in fantasy. He was a top 5 pick in fantasy in a lot of drafts. So hasn't lived up to expectations just yet. But I'm not giving up on him. Again, tough matchup this week. Hopefully he'll be good to go and can bounce back in a battle of Bijan and Derrick Henry in what might be a low scoring game there in Tennessee. Deshaun Watson was injured, cleared, didn't come back. We're not sure if he's going to play this week. The Browns have the Seahawks. It could be PJ Walker. Watson's looking like a massive mistake by the Browns at this point. But I mean, he's got a long time to go on that contract, so I guess he's got time to turn things around. But speaking of the Browns, Jerome Ford's going to be out for the next week or two with an injury, and so now Kareem Hunt and Pierre Strong become better fantasy options. I think Kareem Hunt's probably a pretty good start this week against Seattle, right?
It really is. He is. He is. Kareem is finally going to get his opportunity now to, prove to really the world that he's still a starting running back caliber player, which I still believe. Kid's 27, 28 years old. He hasn't had the wear and tear on his body, the last 2, 3 years because he's been a 1-2 punch kind of guy, not having to take the brunt of things like he did when he was in Kansas City. Really hasn't had to do that since then, right? He's always had Nick Chubb as his tag team partner. But now, he'll have Pierre Strong with him, but I think he'll get the bulk of the opportunities and the carries and obviously the plays, and you'll see his versatility on full display. In between the tackles, outside and then catching the ball out of the backfield. If this offense is able to catch a rhythm, a big piece of it is going to be because of how Kareem Hunt is playing.
Yeah, and the Browns have to run the ball and establish the ground attack, especially if it's going to be PJ Walker under center there in Seattle. We will find out later in the week. Let's talk about Dawson Knox, who hasn't really made much of a fantasy impact, but now he's going to be out. He's got an injury. He may need to have surgery. Dalton Kincaid, who had a big game last week, now suddenly he could end up being a top 10 tight end the rest of the season. Turbo.
Yeah, well, there hasn't been a whole lot of highlights from the tight end spot anyway.
Yeah.
And it kind of feels like that all the time. Year after year, it's Travis Kelsey, and then, you know, kind of like luck of the draw. Even George Kittle to a certain degree hasn't shown the like on the field, he's playing well. He's doing his job. He's making his
Mhm.
blocks. But in the fantasy light of things, it's a lack of production there from Kittle on a consistent basis.
Right.
And so,
Yep.
absolutely, Kincaid, a guy who a lot of us were high on coming out of the draft because of his receiving ability, now is going to get a lot more opportunity to be involved in this offense. And listen, outside of Stephon Diggs, we've talked about this a bunch when it comes to the Bills. Like, who's that number two guy?
Yep.
And for whatever reason, the Bills keep trying to lean on Gabe Davis, and bless his soul, but he's just not that. And so maybe Kincaid can kind of step up and be that be that guy, sort of like Hawkinson has become for the Vikings.
Yeah, Kincaid's and he could be out there on the waiver wire in some leagues, and we're going to talk about the waiver wire right now. I know Turbo's going to be taking some notes because he's got to put in his waiver claims tonight as well. So yeah, I've got to put in claims for like 15 teams, so it's quite a bit. Let's start off though with the quarterback, really there's only one quarterback who's on the waiver wire that I think is worth adding, and that's Kyler Murray. We're not sure when he's coming back, but he's available in more than 50% of leagues on Yahoo. This guy has been, an elite quarterback from a fantasy perspective during his career. We're not sure what we're going to get from him this year in terms of coming off an ACL and being able to run with the ball, which is a big part of his game. But your thoughts on Kyler Murray when he actually is able to come back? Certainly a guy that needs to be owned across the board.
I think he'll have a fast start, because he'll be fresh minded, fresh legs. So I think you'll see some nice spark plays from him early. He's not a guy that I would depend on, 3-4 weeks, into his opportunity to get back and start. That's when you'll start to see, I guess, the Kyler Murray of old, if I even want to phrase it that way, the interceptions, the fumbles, the mistakes, especially, when you think about an offense that, doesn't have a whole lot of weaponry to their disposal outside of James Conner, who's out right now with an injury as well. No disrespect, to those other receivers. So I think the Cardinals are a little bit better with Kyler Murray, but I don't think he's the difference maker that I think that a lot of decision makers for the Cardinals would expect.
And I got to get into some of the backfields around the league with you because in the past, it was, hey, this running back, this starter goes down, and we know who the handcuff is and who's going to be the guy to pick up off the waiver wire to fill that void, both in terms of real and fantasy. This year, that hasn't been the case in every case. So let's talk about the Cardinals here, continuing after the chat about Kyler. 2 weeks ago, James Conner goes down, and it's Amari DiMercato. We go out and spend all our fab on Damari DiMercato, and he touches the ball 3 times, and it's Keontae Ingram, who apparently is the starter. And then we go and we spend on Keontae Ingram, and this past week, he plays special teams and does nothing on offense, and it's DiMercato and Damian Williams. I don't know what the hell is going on in Arizona's backfield. I don't know if Jonathan Gannon just hates our fantasy football teams. I mean, is it DiMercato now going forward? Like as a former running back, Turbo, like I don't understand like the whole situation there in Arizona where you go from a guy who was number one on the depth chart to putting him on special teams and then throwing a guy in there who was third on the depth chart and ultimately he was the lead back. Like, what are the Cardinals doing there? And can we know unless we're in the running backs room?
Well, it's certainly difficult if you're not in the building to try to guess, who's going to play and what's going on. But I always lean on a couple things. Number one, uh, who's the vet, and Demarcado kind of the younger guy. So that's why I think that initially, who they would go with initially.
Keontae Ingram.
Yeah, initially going with Keontae Ingram, who's just a little bit more experienced, made sense. But he didn't get it done. And then you have to look at like a guy like Damian Williams, who's not only gotten it done over his career, but he's been in big time games,
Yeah, Super Bowl.
in
Yeah,
his
for the
career
Chiefs.
as
Yep.
well. And
Mhm.
so you have to think about what does the running back position consist of? Like when teams are gonna go substitution, like the Rams, okay? And it's like, well, why would they just go with Henderson right off the couch? Well, you have to take into account what's required at the running back spot. Okay, we can't just think about fantasy points from rushing touchdowns. Okay, well, you got to be able to pass protect out there on third down. You got to be able to understand what defenses are doing and recognize, certain blitz packages. Okay, so you be able to step up and protect the quarterback. Those are the back. That's why Damian Williams is out there and not the other guy, because he understands, like, okay, they might be coming from the other side, okay, and I got to be able to see it. They're disguising it really well, but because of my experience and all the other defenses that I've seen over the course of my career, I'm going to be able to recognize it, get over there, and make the block, which then is going to lead to opportunities carrying the football, catching it out of the backfield. So, yeah, I think those are things that we have to take into account when we think about the Cardinals, when we think about the Rams, and these backup running backs that are, that may or may not play.
Yeah, you mentioned the Rams, and that was another one. Like all week, we were guessing, oh, well, Zach Evans, it's got to be him. He was third on the depth chart. Oh, no, they're going to bring up Royce Freeman because Zach Evans can't pass protect. And then, oh, wait, they're going to sign Darrell Henderson off the street. And then ultimately, he ended up being the guy, although Freeman got a lot of burn in that game, too, this past week against the Steelers. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it, if you're Zach Evans or Royce Freeman, are you thinking, man, I made the team? Like, what's going on? Why are they signing a guy off the couch and he's going to end up being the starter and play more than I am?
Absolutely, you are. Yeah, yes, especially Zach Evans. Royce, you understand the game a little bit more. You're a veteran. You get it. But for Zach, it's disappointing. But you got to look at yourself in the mirror and say, you know what? Why did they make that choice? What am I not doing for them not to entrust in me the way that they entrust in these other guys who were, on the couch watching the
Yep.
games
Yeah,
earlier this
exactly.
season. So yeah, it's a self, it's a self reflection kind of thing for Zach to put himself in position to get ready.
So Darrell Henderson, Amari DeMarcado will be popular ads off the waiver wire this week. I think Devin Singletary, who got more burn before Houston's bye week, and Damian Pierce to me is still the better play, at least at this point. And they've got a really good matchup against Carolina, but Singletary is definitely going to be worth a look as well. We mentioned Pierre Strong now that Jerome Ford's going to be out. So running back, there's some options. There's nothing great. I think Henderson's clearly the cream of the crop there. Wide receiver, how about Josh Downs? Now, Josh Downs, I've had him on my waiver wire article for 3 straight weeks. This is not a new thing. He's been producing pretty good numbers for the better part of the last month, but for some reason or another, he just didn't get picked up. Well, after he goes for 125 and a touchdown against Cleveland, well, now he's going to get picked up off the wire, and the Colts have the Saints coming up next. Tough matchup, but some of these rookie receivers, we're seeing this more and more often, Turbo. Look what Jordan Addison did on Monday night. We're seeing rookie wide receivers come in the league and make an impact. Jackson Smith-Njigba, without DK Metcalf, had a good game this past weekend. Josh Downs, who's not a big guy at all, right? Zay Flowers, not a big guy, but they're making an impact. What, in your opinion, is the reason why these rookies are coming in at wide receiver and giving us that immediate gratification more than in the past?
Yeah, well, first of all, just to take one quick step back as it pertains to running backs, I think another guy off the waiver wire that you may see is Jeff Wilson Jr.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll see what kind of opportunities he ends up getting as the season prolongs. But these rookie wide receivers, man, it's taking some time for some of these guys to get their footing. You mentioned Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jordan Addison to a certain degree. Took time. But what do those two guys have in common? Well, the starters are out. DK was out. Justin Jefferson was out. So that leads to more targets, more opportunities, and then obviously more opportunities then to produce on the field. You think about Josh Downs in Indy. Well, Alec Pierce has been out. He's been dealing with an injury, so he's kind of stepped in and in some games of his absence has really stepped up. But I'm always weary of flash guys who have a good game, good 2 games, and then they go silent for a couple games. That's kind of been Josh Downs to me. That's why I haven't really been, on the waiver wire train per se as it pertains to going out and getting him, because it's just like, I don't know for sure if that's what I'm gonna get week in and week out, from him. So maybe he's a good guy to have as far as depth is concerned, especially at this part of the season. But certainly a guy who can obviously get it done. He's proven it.
Yeah. Also, Kendrick Bourne has had a couple of good games in a row. He's got Miami this week. He had a big game against them in week 1, so he's worth an ad. If you're in a deeper league, Jalen Hyatt, another rookie wide receiver who had only 2 catches last week, but 2 big long catches. He's a stretch the field kind of guy. Tight end, we talked about Kincaid. He could be floating around out there, not in competitive leagues, but he could be out there in some home leagues. Trey McBride is probably out there. He's starting to see more burn than Zach Ertz. And Taysom Hill has been good the last couple of weeks, but Juwan Johnson could be back this week, so keep that in mind. But Taysom Hill also worth a look off the wire. So next thing I want to do, because we've got our great guest here, Robert Turbin, on the program, we're going to play a little game of Turbo or No Go. And this is going to be a trade situation. So I'm going to throw out a name, and you're going to tell me whether or not you want to trade him, which is no go, or I'm keeping him, which is turbo. Like, you don't want to get rid of this guy rest of the season. I'm going to start off with Tua Tagovailoa, who has got the Patriots this week, who he didn't have a good game against earlier in the season. He's had really good games, but he's had some kind of mad games as well. So are you going turbo or no go on Tua?
I'm going turbo on Tua. He's got too many weapons around him when healthy. Obviously Tyreek, Jalen Waddle, okay, the backs, okay, Mostert. We'll get A-Chain, I think is how you pronounce it, back.
Yep.
I'm keeping Tua.
Okay. Tua is certainly a guy who can put up huge numbers at any moment. I'm interested to see how he does this week against the Patriots at home, especially the Dolphins coming off of a loss to the Philadelphia Eagles. So, but yeah, I mean, Tua at the end of the year is going to end up being a top 10 quarterback in fantasy. 100%. Now this one here is interesting, and you may or may not disagree with me here.
Okay.
Raheem Mostert, like, for me, he has been far and away better than anyone ever predicted he would be.
Right.
But you mentioned A-Chan will be back at some point. You've mentioned Jeff Wilson Jr. also back in the mix. Is Raheem Mostert turbo or no go? Are you looking to trade him right now, or you want to keep him?
You keep him. He's turbo. He's turbo all the way. It takes 2 to tango, and he's still going to be in the mix. Even when A-Chan comes back, he'll still be the lead back. He'll still get his opportunities, and he'll still be very productive on your fantasy team. So he's a turbo as well. Both Miami guys, they're turbo right now.
All right. Josh Jacobs, who, listen, the rushing totals are way down. He's really stayed afloat in fantasy in part because he's been catching the ball out of the backfield. He did neither this past week and had a really bad game. You got Detroit coming up next on Monday night. The Lions are good against the run. Josh Jacobs has overall not produced what we were hoping for. Is he a turbo or a no-go?
This is a tough one.
It is.
Because running back is so difficult in fantasy. The depth-wise, you hate to lose a guy that is going to get opportunities. I think he's a turbo, but he's not a starter. If you have an option there, an alternative that you can put as a starter and put Josh Jacobs on the bench, he's a turbo, but he's a reserve.
Wow.
Until proven differently down the road.
It's been tough sledding with him. It really has been. The good thing is that he's getting the volume. It's just when you got a tough matchup or the Raiders fall behind, it's problematic. I mean, and this was a game this past week. I mean, they played the Bears. I mean, listen, the Bears defense is not, the 85 Bears defense with Buddy
Come
Ryan
on.
and
Right.
and so I think that's why people are certainly down on Josh Jacobs right now. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't know
Foreman
that
has
you'd be
been
able to get value
freaking
for him if you did try to trade him right now. To be quite honest with you, I don't know how much value you get.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's another why I'd keep him.
Hmm.
That's another reason why I'd keep him, because it's just like you're probably not going to get much for him anyway. And it's just like, I mean, listen, if I offered you Josh Jacobs for Deontay Foreman, who had a hell of a game, you might take that. You might want to take that. You know what I'm saying? But we're expecting Jacobs to play the way that Foreman did, who
Yeah,
had a
exactly.
huge game.
Yeah,
You
Foreman
know,
saved my bacon in a bunch of leagues last week. Another running back, Aaron Jones, who came back last week and had a great matchup and did nothing. In fact, AJ Dillon had more touches. Was this more of a situation where they're kind of easing back from the hamstring, or is this what we're going to see from Aaron Jones? Is he a turbo or a no go?
he's a turbo, and this is only because they're trying to ease him back in. AJ Dillon. You has done nothing. You want to talk about somebody who's done nothing?
Yeah,
AJ Dillon has had all the opportunities in the world, okay, because Aaron Jones has been out to prove that you can be, a quote unquote bell cow, the guy. He's done nothing. He's done nothing in fantasy as a starter for folks who have him on their team, all right, as a reserve guy stepping in for Aaron Jones. He hasn't given you much on a consistent basis. Certainly not the sort of numbers that we were expecting for a guy who was going to be carrying the load for the Green Bay Packers, a team also leaning on the run because of their young quarterback in Jordan Love. So, yeah, I think Aaron Jones, he'll find his footing and he'll be good to go. He's also a keeper.
yeah. I mean, Dillon's had one good game against the Raiders, and that was it. I mean, he's been such a disappointment. All right, we'll move on to the wide receivers. I don't think it's any coincidence that you went turbo on all the running backs, by the way. Uh, Devontae Smith, like AJ Brown is getting all the targets, and he's really made Devontae Smith hard to start on a weekly basis. Still an explosive player in a really good offense. Is now the time to trade him or trade for him? Are you going turbo or no go on Devontae Smith?
Man, this is a tough one right here. This is a tough one. Um, wow, because I do believe that you can get good value. Like if if I've got Devonte Adams and someone says, hey, you want to do Devonte for Adam Thielen straight up, I I
Wow.
might have to consider that
Isn't that
because
crazy?
Adam Thielen at least has the consistency this season. He's going to be there. And Devontae Smith completely Caspers on us. And
Yeah.
he's done it the last few weeks. And so I would say if there is a lateral move or a slight upgrade, I'd trade him.
Yeah.
He's a what is it, a no go?
Yeah. I know. I'll tell you, it is crazy to think that Adam Thielen has been a better fantasy wide receiver than Devontae Adams, and Devontae Smith, who was drafted far ahead of Adam Thielen. You would trade Smith for Thielen straight up in a heartbeat right now.
Yeah.
That's that, and there's no second thought about that. That's just it's a scenario I never thought we would see.